I've gone through the arsenal for Tiberian Dawn, and that leaves Red Alert. Cue the music. Alright, so there's about double the amount of units basically in Red Alert versus the original Tiberian Sun. Not to mention there's basically quite a few structures to go through as well and powers. But whatever, let's get to it. And we start off with the rifle infantry. How do I rank the rifle infantry? Let's see. You know, I'm gonna say that the rifle infantry are actually laudable in, well, no, I really can't put them at laudable, can I? Because it's infantry and it's Red Alert, so mediocre. I should probably say right off the bat here that the thing about, like, you know, Red Alert versus Tiberian Dawn is that infantry really took a hit to, like, you know, their usability because they were so easy to get squished by, like, tanks that basically move, like, you know, super fast and basically other issues like that in, like, Red Alert. Basically, the game was not really balanced around, like, you know, infantry use, so they were kind of weak in that sort of regard. Anyhow, I do think that the rifle infantry was, like, you know, improved substantially from, like, the, you know, the minigunner from, like, you know, Tiberian Dawn. Basically they had a little bit more range, which, like, meant that they, like, weren't instantly gonna be, like, you know, squished by, like, you know, tanks and stuff that are, like, you know, 2 tiles away. And they also, like, you know, were pretty, like, effective against our infantry as well. So you have, like, a massive infantry, send them off to, like, you know, kill a bunch of grenadiers, and they wouldn't necessarily all be, like, killed pretty fast, which is nice. They're still killed pretty fast by, like, you know, a volley of, like, you know, grenades coming out there, you know, and wave them at once, but they were better overall for sure. Alright, so that's the rifleman. Next we have the grenadier. Now, I'll note that basically versus, like, you know, Tiberian Dawn, the grenadier wasn't bad, but wasn't fantastic or anything, not really. I'll note that the grenadier is still pretty useful for, like, you know, taking out mobs of like, infantry and, like, you know, demoing structures and stuff like that. But I didn't really find that, like, you know, the grenadier is, like, you know, that much better than the rifleman in, like, you know, this version. Just for a simple reason that, like, you know, the rifleman had that extra range, and these guys are still, like, blew up and, you know, kill themselves pretty easily if, like, you know, you kill, like, just one of them. It's not to say they weren't usable, but they weren't as good, basically, as, like, you know, Tiberian Dawn for sure. Alright, the Rocket Soldier. So, the Rocket Soldier is a little bit more, like, you know, beneficial than these guys, so I'm going to put him basically in laudable. I don't think he's excellent or anything, because, like, you know, he's still going to get squished by vehicles and stuff like that pretty easily, but let's go over basically the Rocket Soldier. So, I'll note that basically in Tiberian Dawn, I said the Rocket Soldier wasn't, like, you know, fantastic as much against, like, you know, aircraft, because basically everything else was basically fantastic about aircraft. But I'll note in Red Alert that the aircraft basically died very easily. So just a couple hits from, like, you know, a Rocket Soldier and, like, maybe something else is usually enough to down an aircraft very easily. Except unless it's a helicopter, in which case you need a lot of anti-air to take out helicopters in this game. So the thing about the Rocket Soldier is that, like, you know, it's not really useful for, like, you know, going against, like, vehicles and stuff like that, but it is really useful against aircraft. It's, like, primary role. And I feel that basically deserves to be, like, you know, knocked up at least above the other infantry for that purpose, so I'll say it's laudable, because that's what it's basically good for. Alright, the Flame Trooper. I won't say this guy's useless, but he certainly is deficient, for sure. I'll note that the Flame Trooper is, like, you know, he's been changed a little bit from, like, you know, Tiberian Dawn. He's not, like, you know, a huge, like, wave of, like, you know, fire type of a unit like he was in the original, like, Tiberian Dawn. He basically fires, like, bolts of, like, you know, fire that, like, explodes on the ground and, like, does damage, like, you know, in an area. So he's sort of like an improved Grenadier. In many ways, I can't really say the Flame Trooper from, like, Red Alert is like all that great, because even though it does, like, you know, fairly good damage to, like, you know, infantry and stuff like that, it's basically a small delay before it's, like, you know, fire hits the ground, and, like, you know, it really wasn't, like, you know, that great of a unit, basically, like, you know, in some other areas as well. Like, you know, he can't, like, fire through walls, he can't, like, you know, do a lot of other, like, you know, useful stuff. So yeah, it's a deficient unit for sure. Alright, the attack dog. Terrible. I really want to like the attack dog, by the way, but the thing about this game is that, as I basically said, it's basically not an infantry-focused game. So, I'm really worried about having anti-infantry type of specialists like this guy right here. I'm not the thing about the attack dog is that he can't really use it to check spies, so I guess this is his primary role, but if you're basically playing a multiplayer, you can actually see the spies and don't need to use any spies against you in single player, so it's not useful for that purpose really. So it's just a terrible unit basically in my mind, so let's throw it down as terrible. The shock trooper. I want to like the shock trooper, but it's just too expensive, so I'm gonna say it's efficient. The shock trooper is basically a unit that has very good range, and well, it doesn't have very good range actually. It has very poor range, and it does. No, what can I say about the shock trooper? The shock trooper is basically the same price as a heavy tank, and it doesn't really have the advantages of the heavy tank of speed or range, but it does have very good damage, I guess. And it can't be run over because it's special infantry that can't be run over by vehicles, so there's that too. But the thing about the shock trooper is that it's just so expensive for what it basically does, and other infantry can basically kill it pretty quickly, so it's really falls off in that sort of front. I'd rather send 9 infantry to our target right, and one of these guys that can't be run over, so there's that. Alright, Tanya. I love me a Tanya. All the single player missions of Tanya are fun, but is she useful really? Basically, going back to the attack dog, we don't really need an anti-infantry unit, so she's just mainly used for the bridges. But I'll note there's a nice little caveat about Tanya versus the other infantry. Basically, versus the commando, when she basically blows up a structure or a bridge, there's no survivors that basically pop out of it. So she can basically rip through a base, just blowing up everything in her path, if there's nothing really to stop her. So she does have that sort of advantage basically going for her. But I don't feel it's a great advantage, so I think we'll have to basically throw her in mediocre. I'm really tempted to put her in laudable, but yeah, I think she's just a mediocre unit because she basically costs $1,000, which is a little bit more than the shock trooper. But she basically has all the the disadvantages of being infantry. She's not really she's a dedicated anti-infantry unit, so you don't really need that really in this game. You have to also get into a base in order to blow her up structures, so there's that too. So there's that, but whatever. Alright, the spy. I do like spies, by the way. Especially the single player, it can be really fun, dodging around dogs and stuff like that. But it's that's the only real case you can actually use a spy. So the thing about the spies is that they're used for information gathering. The enemy troops will not recognize them as being an enemy unless they're told by a player to basically kill them, which makes them sort of useless in multiplayer because you can actually tell which units are not yours. But in single player, it can be pretty useful. And you can get some nice little advantages from them. But is it really great? I really can't say it is. The thing about the spy is that it feels like a unit that was better improved upon in later games, and it has its purpose basically in the campaign. But that's basically all it's really useful for. So I really can't really recommend it as being a great unit to use. So it feels deficient to use spies, and that's all I can really say about them. Though unlike the thief, which is basically just terrible. So I'll note that the Allies thief is basically a unit used to steal the enemy's credits when they basically get into a silo or refinery. The thing about that though is that it's really hard to sort of really find use for that. Basically, they're engineers can basically capture structures and you can sell them and stuff like that, or do stuff stuff like this, capture a base, build stuff basically out of their buildings, or build stuff around their buildings to cause mayhem. The thief just basically gets you money, and that is useful, but it's just hard to really justify their use in a lot of situations. So they're really a terrible unit. Now I will say that the engineer has been hampered quite a lot in this game. Basically, Command and Conquer, the original one, the engineer can basically instantly capture a structure, but in this one they can't. You actually have to dash it down to critical first in red, and that really puts a damper base on their use because the the thing about the engineer is that, like, you have to, like, get to like, the enemy base and get into the building and capture it. But now you basically have to damage the building first with, like, either multiple engineers or, like, other units basically in order to like, capture buildings. So there is that to basically consider. It does have the advantage, I guess, of like, being able to fix your buildings, and that's still useful. But yeah, I have to say the engineer feels kind of deficient. Alright, the medic. This is another deficient unit. So, I'll note that the medic is basically used to like, heal your infantry. And that can be useful, but in a lot of situations, your infantry are probably pretty expendable, so you're probably not going to be spending your time healing them anyways. At least in single player, you might be able to get like some use out of the medic and like those special missions, like corresponding to them, or we basically have time, like downtime, to basically like, heal up your units. But overall, it's basically a unit that basically doesn't really have much of a purpose, so it feels kind of useless. And you really can't like recommend something like a really expensive $800 medic basically to do like stuff in the field for you. So there's that as well. Unlike the mechanic. So the field mechanic is basically the opposite of the or like it's basically the same type of thing as the medic, but it basically heals vehicles. So I'll throw that basically out in a laudable. This guy basically fixes vehicles for free, so he doesn't have like any credit costs at the service depot. And he basically also like is mobile, so you can basically move around in the field. So we basically have like an APC for the allies, drop him off in like the middle of a fight, actually pick up their stuff basically in the fight to keep him alive. So he's useful in that front basically. Yeah, I think he's laudable. He deserves to be up in laudable, so this is from there. Alright, so that's basically all the infantry out of the way. And unlike basically like, the tier list for like, Tiberian Dawn, I'll bring that basically up a little bit later. But basically you can see that there's already basically a big like, downward trend of these guys basically versus like, Tiberian Dawn, but whatever. Alright, so vehicles. We start off with the radar jammer. And I think for a radar jammer, we're just gonna say it's terrible. So the idea for the radar jammer is like not a bad one. You basically build them, you get them close to the enemy radar, and then, like you basically shut down the radar. But the problem is you have to get them fairly close in order like in order to basically do this. And it probably would just be easier to blow up the radar basically if you have the chance to do it as well. So there's that to basically consider. I think that the radar jammer could have been like a good idea basically if like combined with like the Tesla tank. And I guess like you basically see that basically in Counter-Strike. But yeah, it's just like a unit that like it doesn't really serve enough purpose to really useful. So terrible. The mobile gap generator. I'm gonna say the mobile gap generator basically as it is right now is terrible. So I'll note that you don't really build mobile gap generators at all, really like for yourself in the campaign, but you do like have access to them, I believe, in like the multiplayer. But basically fighting against like the gap generator, I found that they're sort of like a buggy unit because they're very easily able to like shroud like an entire piece of map they basically already explored, and I really don't like that idea. I don't mind like the cloak idea of like the nod units basically in, like Tiberian Dawn, but the gap generator is just like sort of annoying. So it feels like a terrible unit to really use and really fight against for that matter. So it's terrible. Alright, the ore truck. So unlike with like the Tiberium harvester, the ore truck from Red Alert is basically able to self-heal basically up to 50%, which is like nice. I think we'll throw this one basically unlaudable because basically it's like your versus like the Tiberium harvester, this guy's like a whole lot better for like gathering resources. He basically goes and grabs the resources, comes back, dumps them immediately into like the refinery, and it goes back to his work. There's like no like slow upload basically into like the refinery. You're not like worrying about this guy like taking too much damage as opposed to like the harvester, because this guy can at least self heal if like he like takes a little pitiful damage. So yeah, ore truck. I think it's laudable. It does its job, so let's just throw it up where it deserves to be. Alright, the NCV. I never really found it to be that useful to like build like a secondary base in like any like Command and Conquer games, so we're just gonna throw this basically down terrible. I'll note that the the construction yard is like a lot more powerful in Red Alert, so at least it has that going for you. But I never really found it like that useful to build additional bases. So yeah, let's just throw down terrible. Alright, now, I'll note these like vehicles down here are basically demand layers. And you'll note that this one basically says AP and this one says AT. AP basically means anti-personnel, AT base means anti-tank. So this is like the Soviet one, this is the Allied one. And I'll note that there's going to be a fairly big difference between these two because the AP one is basically going to be down here in terrible. And the AP one, or anti-tank one, will be up here in mediocre. Alright, so to sort of explain the thing about the mine layers, the idea of like being able to lay mines to actually blow up your enemies is actually pretty like novel for like this game, and you can get a lot of use basically out of like blowing up like Soviet heavy tanks within like the Allied campaign missions where you basically know where it's coming from. But that's basically for the Allied mine layer. On the for a Soviet one, I never actually really found that one useful because you never really have to worry about infantry in this game, and on a similar fact, the mines are basically blown up by vehicles that run over them, so there's that too. So it makes the mines feel a little bit useless to use. So yeah, I wish the mines were better for anti-personnel, but they just aren't. So it goes down to terrible for it. But the anti-tank one for the allies is okay because at least it's like got some use, and if you know where the enemy's coming from, you can only lock off their areas. Whereas like annoyed or harvesters and things like that. So mediocre. All right, the Allies Ranger. So I note the Allies Ranger is basically like your infantry support for anti-infantry support, and it's a very deficient vehicle. Now I'll note that versus like the Humvee or the buggy, basically from Tiberian Dawn, this is actually a fairly expensive vehicle. It costs 600 credits basically to build a Ranger, and you don't really get a whole lot of use basically out of the Ranger. So it feels like a unit that really lacks. Basically, it's used for killing infantry, but you really have to worry about infantry in this game because your tanks are basically easily killing off. So yeah, I felt like a vehicle that just didn't really have a purpose. It's not really good for scouting because the AP's got better sight range or heavy armor, and the APCs is only 200 credits, basically more than the Ranger here. So there's that too. It's an efficient vehicle, I think. So yeah, we'll just throw it down there. And it's maybe being killed by its cost, not by anything else. Just throw it out there too, but whatever. All right, the APC. So the APC is basically a lobby unit in Red Alert. Because the infantry are kind of useless, you don't really use them for a whole lot of purpose, but there can be some idea basically to pack a mechanic into an NPC or a bunch of engineers to do some damage that way. So it's not entirely useless compared to Tiberian Dawn, but infantry basically they sort of bring us down just a little bit. Actually, you know what? Let's just say it's mediocre. You don't really need it for the anti-infantry. It's kind of purpose is pretty good, I guess, but well, nah, you don't really need the APC for scouting. So the thing about the APC is that it doesn't really serve much of a purpose basically in this game. So it goes down because the infantry are kind of poor, and there's other vehicles like the light tank that basically can fill its role for scouting. So there's that too. Speaking of the tanks, so light tank, medium tank, heavy tank, Mav tank, Tesla tank, and Chrono tank. So I'll note that the light tank is not as useless basically in this game, and for what it's basically worth, I think I'll say it's laudable. So I'll note that the light tank basically in Red Alert was a lot faster than the one in Tiberian Dawn, and also the benefit of being able to up quite a bit of damage for its small status. It's still kind of a lot weaker than the medium tank, which is basically going to be an excellent tank to sort of talk about. But the thing about the light tank is that it basically is very useful to be thrown basically into the fray to sort of help out with damage. And it also fires a lot faster than the medium tank as well, so it does more damage basically overall versus it. It's only real downside is the fact that it is a lot weaker, so it can't stand to fight very long, but you can use it quite well, so it's laudable. The medium tank basically is more of a beast. It's more of your main workhorse for the allied armies. You basically throw it in first to sort of absorb the damage, and then the light tank comes in to sort of finish off what's basically left. I'll note that basically versus the light tank, this can also take hits from the base defenses of the Soviet forces quite well. he also is able to like output quite a bit of damage as well. This is like compared to like the light tank, so there's that going for him too. So again, excellent unit to thank the medium tank, so it goes right there. Alright, so we get down to like the heavy tank and the nav tank. So I'll note that the heavy tank is still a pretty good unit, but it's only laudable. And you might find it a little bit odd because the heavy tank is actually superior to the medium tank. But here's the thing about this game for Red Alert. Now I'll note that basically in Command & Conquer like Tiberian Dawn, tanks didn't really dodge shells or fire or anything like that. But basically got hit when they got hit. But in Red Alert, it's very possible to sort of dodge shells from tanks. So the medium tank is not as useful as the allies light tank or medium tank. It's still probably gonna do a lot of damage basically versus allied tanks, but because it's how long it takes to build the heavy tank, and because of how much faster the allied tanks basically fire, you basically have a little bit of an issue with using heavy tanks to sort of fight medium tanks. So it goes down a notch basically for that reason. And there's the nav tank that basically goes down to mediocre, because unlike basically the other tanks here, the nav tank is basically so slow that it can't dodge bullets. So yeah, basically you basically throw it into the fray and it's basically a bullet sponge that's gonna get destroyed. But well, the saving grace for the nav tank basically in Red Alert is the fact that it can be useful for anti-infantry purposes. Those nav tusk missiles that didn't really work in Tiberian Dawn do work basically in this game, so he at least has that purpose basically being an anti-infantry platform. He can also be useful for anti-air units, anti-air ability in the battlefield as well, because the Soviets don't have a whole lot of anti-air abilities outside of the rocket troops basically the rocket soldier basically in multiplayer. This guy basically is their anti-air ability in Red Alert. So at least it goes in mediocre, I guess. Alright, the Tesla tank from the Aftermath expansion. So the Tesla tank is basically a very long-range unit that basically has a good amount of damage. Versus the shock troopers, he's basically a lot more fit for the role of basically fire an arc over the heavy tanks and to stay out of the fray. He's not very strong, basically taking hits, but because you basically can do so much damage basically at range, you basically just keep these guys out of the fray. You can just destroy stuff basically in a very fast hitting shock and awe type of roll, so to speak. So it's laudable. Alright, the Chrono Tank. The Chrono Tank is pretty powerful, but it's also pretty expensive. If you can basically find a place to basically throw your Chrono Tanks, you can basically maneuver around to basically do a lot of damage to them. And I'll note the thing about the Chrono Tank is that their damage basically outfit from their missiles is quite powerful. So you can basically plop these guys down to a Tesla coil, and the Tesla coil might get shot off, but these guys can rip it apart pretty fast, and because they move into the base and start messing up stuff very quickly with enough of them. But again, they're also expensive, so the price tag is what I think is what bringing them down right now. So as for worth mentioning, their price tag is bad. So yeah. All right, the Allies' artillery. Terrible. It feels really sad to say the artillery for the Allied forces is just as terrible as the one for Nod, but the thing about Nod's artillery is that basically it was able to at least sometimes outrange the advanced guard tower if you position it properly. And the thing about this artillery is that it is able to sort of maneuver around to hit moving targets a little bit better and stuff like that. But the artillery basically in both these games is just too light. It just doesn't have enough kick-ass firepower to sort of make up for its deficits. And it really is it's one of those units that it could be better if it had more range, but they just don't. So yeah, terrible. Not like the V2 though. Alright, so I'll note that the V2 it is able to outrange the Tesla coil. And it's also able to outrange all the allied base defense as well. It's very slow firing. It's basically the same sort of fire rate as the SSM from Tiberian Dawn, and it does very good damage. It's not entirely laudable though, because it has such light armor, and because it's a very mobile game Red Alert, Unless like you're like going against like static defenses, it's not really that useful. And I find like this is a game that like really like it's more geared toward like mobile units like the tanks. So you want to send like a massive like medium tanks or light tanks and stuff like that, basically to mop up stuff rather than this guy. So really all I can say is like it's a mediocre unit for that purpose. All right, so mutually assured destruction tank. So the Mad Tank is basically a suicide unit that basically blows up itself and damages all vehicles and structures around it in a large radius, including like your friends. You can do a lot of damage with like the Mad Tank, but isn't really worth like thinking about, I guess. Another maybe put the Iron Curtain basically on it. It'll basically like won't explode until the Iron Curtain goes away. It's also pretty slow. You have to basically get in position before it like from fire, and it takes time to fire. I found it basically probably mediocre because it is like an interesting idea. It's just like so to speak. Alright, the demolitions truck. So the demolitions truck is basically very expensive, but it runs up to like an enemy or like structure or whatever, blows up in their face, and it's like nukes them, so to speak. Now, I will note you have to be very careful with units because they can blow up your own forces if you're uncareful with them, but if used right, they can like do a lot of damage to sort of like destroy like your enemies. But they are a little bit expensive, so there's that going for them. When used properly, you can like do a lot of damage to these guys, but yeah, it could be like better perhaps in some areas, so there's that as well. Alright, the helicopters. So we have the longbow, the hind, the chinook. All of these are very, very powerful in like red alert. Now I'll note that like the thing about helicopters basically in like red alert is that they're very, very powerful in the fact that like SAM sites and like AA guns take forever to take them down. So you can basically like unleash a huge payload to basically like, knock out stuff. I think we'll say that the longbow is at least excellent, because even though it takes a while to basically build it up, you can do a lot of damage basically to stuff with it, so it's a good unit. The hind isn't that bad as well, but the allies do have a little bit more basically going for them, but yeah, I'll say like this is lovable. There's like the rocket soldiers basically consider, but this guy can like move through the rocket soldiers pretty fast anyways with their like machine guns, and they're still going to be pretty useful against structures. Yeah, it's okay. It's lovable. Alright, the Chinook, which is basically our transport helicopter. So the transport helicopter is like pretty powerful. Drop your units basically off in the field of battle, but sort of like the APC doesn't really have that like much useful use for basically outside of like ferrying around like troops that like you basically drop into your base like engineers and tying in to basically blow up stuff. It's not really an infantry game, so mediocre. All I can really say. All right, the Yak and the MiG. So aircraft is pretty powerful in this game. Yaks basically like do a lot of damage to like buildings and like infantry, for example. Makes it it's like overpowered. I don't think the Yak basically by itself is all that useful because you need to basically build a bunch of them in order to like do the damage with them, and they also have some issues with the bibs of like structures, so they might accidentally attack the bib as opposed to the building itself. The MiG though is like super powerful though, and it's an excellent unit. MiGs can be used to like decimate structures. They can be used to decimate like stray ships and stuff like that if you want to as well. Excellent units overall, I think. Alright, so unlike with Tiberian Dawn, there's also like ships basically in this game, and you have like both like ships and submarines basically to work with like the sea vehicles. So the transport. So I will note that like this game, it sort of predates a lot of like the ideas, so let's say like StarCraft and like other games like that basically have like games where they actually have like space for like the different type of units. So you have like siege tanks in StarCraft having like a space of 4 as opposed to Marines, so you have the space of 1. Transports always have a space of 5, and that means they can actually carry like 5 units as opposed to like 5 space of units. The transport is pretty powerful because you can actually transport a lot of like vehicles and stuff like that. And you basically like, can just destroy with them for that purpose. It could be better if you could actually like pack in a bunch of infantry, but you really can't do that, so not really much to say about that. I mean, they do their job. You can basically drop off like a massive amount of like, vehicles, basically very, very close to the enemy base or inside their base, so yeah, they're worth noting. Alright, the Allies gunboat. I won't say the Allies gunboat is like terrible, but it's not that great. It's basically a $500 like, ship that basically, does a little bit of damage to submarines and has a little piddly gun. Actually, I picked up the Iron Curtain there, but whatever. I think we're probably just kind of efficient. I really want to like the gunboat for like the Allied forces, but the thing about the gunboat is that like, its range isn't really that great with like the cannon, and they don't do enough damage to subs, so they're like making them useful against those as well. So it doesn't really have much of a purpose really for me. Yeah, that's all I really can say. This is supposed to say the destroyer though. Guys, damn well, I'm gonna put my foot this guy in fantastic for sure. So the Allied destroyer. This thing is basically anti-sub capable, and it's capable of like destroying aircraft and doing lots of damage basically to like ground targets as well. I don't think it's basically able to outrange the Tesla coils like it could basically in like the original like CNC Red Alert 95 like game, but you can basically do a lot of damage to destroyers still, and it's still a fantastic unit overall. So yeah, fantastic. First unit to get there, destroyer. And it's basically going to be followed by the cruiser, I think, as well, so yeah, I'll throw this guy to be something fantastic. I'm a big fan of like the cruiser. I like how the cruiser can be used to like decimate like a building or like units in like seconds, so to speak. So it deserves to be like up there, basically. I think in like the higher class of like units. Well, maybe I'll put an excellent. It is like a little bit of time to basically get the cruiser. You have to basically get the tech center for it and everything else, but it's still pretty powerful. The cruiser, you can basically like decimate like their buildings to get basically close enough. So yeah, just do a lot of damage to them. And this is like considering the fact that these guys can't really target subs in the water. The thing about the cruiser is that because they're able to like what are a bunch of like submarine torpedo hits, they can basically like still get off some shots if they get close enough to the enemy base if you like let them. So yeah, they're good enough. All right, the Soviet submarine. Basically, the Soviet submarine is just used for like anti-ship control, and it's not a bad purpose for it, especially when it's paired up with like missile subs. But by themselves, they're actually sort of mediocre. They're really expensive. They don't like do a whole lot of damage, so they sort of like lag behind that sort of front. Once you get the missile subs, they're like useful at least to defend them, but by themselves, they're just not that great to find. So I really can't say they're that great. They have a purpose, but not a great purpose. The missile sub, though, that's a lovable unit. They're kind of like the cruiser in that they do a lot of damage. They're also stealth capable, so they're a lot harder to see coming. And you know what? I should probably throw them up in excellent because they are sort of hard to see coming because they're stealth. They have to be a little closer to the enemy to actually hit them, so there's like that to consider, but they still do a lot of damage when those hits basically hit. So yeah, we'll throw that in excellent. Alright, the Allies Gap Drainer. So I treat the Allies Gap Drainer as being like sort of a defensive structure because you're basically shielding your like enemy from like seeing what's going on. And unlike with the mobile Gap Drainer, it's a little bit more like sane, I guess, when it's used because it's basically a static defense, and it basically is like during its travel around, and you're basically running around the shroud, but there's no glitching or bugs or anything like attributed to it. It doesn't really work against the AI, so that's like its own real drawback. But overall, it's like a pretty good weapon, so it's at least mediocre. We'll throw it right there. Alright, the Allies pillbox is kind of efficient. I want to like the Allies pillbox, but it goes like it goes down by like a V2 rocket launch to its face. It doesn't have a lot of damage basically to soak up other damage either from like tanks to hit it, and even though it's supposed to be like anti-infantry, it's not really that useful for that purpose either. So Yeah, it's efficient. The camel pillbox is a little bit better. And it takes a few more hits to go down, but it's more expensive and kind of annoying basically to see as well. Probably mediocre. Now, I love that the Allies turret, I have to say it's efficient as well. They really can't like fight against like, you know, allied like, you know, not allied, but, you know, Soviet heavy tanks very well because they basically like, do so much damage to them like up front to heavy tanks that they'll just like go down pretty fast. Yeah, like the turrets versus the medium tanks basically in like Tiberian Dawn, they at least stood a chance basically to take it down, but heavy tanks and like, you know, melee tanks will just rip through these guys and it's just not worth it to like sort of build them. Alright, the Allies' AA gun. It requires power to use, it's got very short range, unfortunately. And it does take down aircraft, but because they have a lot more health based in this game, it's sort of efficient. I mean, this is a game where you actually want to use the rocket soldiers basically just to defend yourself against like air attacks, so to speak, so... I mean, you can use like AA guns, but they don't really do enough, I think. Alright, the Soviet flame turret. The flame turret can't fire over walls, and it's got very short range, because, you know, it's a short range like weapon. I mean, the Allies do have a lot of like light units, but they're not that many, so it's efficient. You're not really going after infantry. It's got too short range to really fight infantry, so efficient. All right, the Soviet SAM site. So the Soviet SAM site can do quite a bit of damage to like air units, like, you know, because it's got like more range and stuff like that. But it goes down pretty fast if it takes like, you know, too many hits, especially from like, you know, longbows and stuff like that. It also has some other issues as well, like, you know, the fact that it has to sort of like, you know, track the enemy to basically hit them, so if it's basically moving a line, it's very hard to hit them. I think I have to say these guys are efficient because they really are efficient. Not like the Soviet Tesla coil though. So, the Soviet Tesla coil is basically like, you know, a fantastic base defense. It can basically like, you know, hit multiple infantry like, you know, 3 times, or do like, you know, a bit of concentrated damage to like a vehicle. Compared to like say the Albus of Light from Tiberian Dawn, it's like a huge step up in like being able to hit infantry, and you know, there's really nothing bad basically to say about it, or the fact that like it goes off line when you have like no power for it. So yeah, fantastic. All right, so walls. Much like with like, you know, Tiberian Dawn, walls aren't really fantastic, and even though you can't really like, you know, do anything like, you know, bugs or anything with them, they're still like, you know, not great until you get the concrete. So sandbags and barbed wire, you know, just sit down here and terrible, because that's basically what they are. They're terrible. I will note that the concrete wall is probably not as good basically in like, you know, Thriller, because you obviously have a mobile base and stuff like that. So I think I'll say it's efficient basically for this game. Alright, so that's basically all the units basically out of the way. Now we get to the superpowers. And the first one was the spy plane. So I really like the idea of a spy plane being able to like, you know, fly across the battlefield and like, you know, reveal stuff. And early on in like the Soviet campaign, it's very useful to basically find what's going on. But when considered say it's like GPS satellite or like, you know, being able to scout out normally with like, you know, our stuff and like the gap bearing as well, it sort of like loses a lot of its luster. It's a good idea. It's just that there's so many counters basically to it being useful. It's like, you know, is it laudable? Yeah, I'll say the spy plane is at least laudable, because it can be useful to basically try and find out what's going on in your enemy's base and like build a gap barrier and like multiplayer, I guess. And even if there is a gap barrier, you can basically still like, you know, fly over the gap barrier and basically see what's there. So, okay, yeah, we'll say it's laudable. Alright, the sonar pulse. So, this requires you to get a spy basically inside a sub-pen for the allies. And even though it can be useful, it takes too long to basically charge the sonar pulse, and like, you know, it only reveals the submarines for like a few seconds. It could be so much better, but you know, it's just not, so oh well. All I can really say about it. The GPS system. Do I want to say GPS is fantastic? I mean, it basically reveals the entire map. Unless there's a gap during or something like that. I think I'll say that GPS is excellent because it is very like useful to like reveal the entire map and like know what's basically going on. But you can actually use a lot of your units basically to like sort of scout out a lot of map basically as well. Use a lot of time. It's more useful basically in single player campaigns and best place where it's like your main use is basically for. Nah, I'll say it's fantastic. I really do like me some GPS, so let's throw it obviously up there. I also like paratroopers, by the way, so hopefully these guys are basically laudable. It's nice to be able to drop your paratroopers somewhere, basically to like sort of harass the enemy or like grab like crates in a single player campaign and stuff like that. So you don't get it too often, but you get them enough. So yeah, we'll throw that basically in laudable. Parabombs, efficient. The thing about the parabombs, by the way, in like Red Alert versus like Tiberian Dawn, is that they aren't as effective, as not as many. You basically drop them on a target, and then like sometimes you'll basically hit the target, sometimes you won't. And the planes basically have a good chance of being shot down a lot of time when you basically drop him too. So there's that as well. Yeah, it's sufficient. No way around it. All right, the Chrono Shift. So Chrono Shift basically like moves your units basically around instantly to like different locations. And if you're basically using like cruisers in like the ally campaign, you can do a lot of damage with them. But unfortunately, you don't really get cruisers in the ally campaign, so there's that. I have to say the Chrono Shift is kind of like mediocre, I think. I mean, it's nice to be able to like Chrono Shift like a cruiser to like blow up stuff, but you can't really Chrono Shift anything really else because there's nothing really strong enough on the allied force side to basically do so. And if you try using an APC, it basically kills the occupants, so there's that too. So yeah, mediocre. The Iron Curtain. So the Iron Curtain can be pretty devastating because it can basically make you invulnerable, and then you're gonna send them anywhere to basically blow up stuff. So you put that basically on a V2, drive it straight to a guy's base, and it's like get some really good shots basically off, and something that is very vital basically to keep it protected, stuff like that. I never really used it myself, like the Iron Curtain, but it doesn't say it's like a bad thing. So yeah, it's like fantastic. And of course, this Nuclear Strike. Both sides get Nuclear Strike in this game, but it's only like multiplayer where you can really build them. But when they come down, they do a lot of damage, so fantastic. All I can really say about it. Alright, so let's just quickly go to like, the Tib Dawn list that I have here. I would like to see like a presentation for this, but oh well. Of course, I can't really like show it off like that way either. Alright, well, that's basically how you're going to see this. So, note there's basically quite a few similarities between like, these like two maps. I still have like the medium tank being like an excellent unit. APC basically dropped down from excellent to like, mediocre because, Red Alert in infantry, not the greatest and all that stuff. Note that the ships in the MiG basically like got up here pretty high, and like the longbow too, but a lot of the other stuff basically dropped down as well. Like, V2s are really kind of weak down here, I guess, I'll say, and I rate like, the defense is like, way down here as well. So it's like, defenses, they go up a little bit here, 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 and, it's still deficient here, I guess. But here it's just like, deficient, 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 deficient. They're all deficient over here. Let's save this one, I guess. So, DFuxa. Red Alert, all units ranked. And we'll basically like go copy this. Not sure why it says, buildable or buildable like this, but whatever. We know what it basically is. Trainable, buildable units in the Command and Conquer Rail Alert. Alright, well there we go. I may do some more tier lists in the future, by the way, but I think it's probably a good stopping point for right now for a lot of these, like, you know, lists we've been doing right now. You should probably, like, you know, enter your own, like, tier list, I guess, as well, but whatever. For now, hope you guys basically enjoyed that, and take care.